My name is Alisa. I'm from Florida currently, originally from Russia. I work as a licensed psychotherapist. I specialize in trauma and bring in a lot of different modalities to working with people with trauma. My family was, left back in Russia. I didn't have no money. I didn't have proper English. And that's how I got my journey started in the United States, and then getting a lot of traumatic experiences along the way.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reubin Burney, and welcome to One Moment Podcast. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll let our distinguished guests and the other co-hosts talk about themselves as well. Like I said, my name is Reubin Burney. I'm a certified substance abuse counselor for 25 years experience. The reason I wanted to do a podcast because at 69, I want to continue learning and growing. I'm new at this. We've made mistakes. We're relatively new podcast, but I think I'm learning great communication skills and getting over the fear of public speaking, although I do a lot of groups. So I'm learning from this experience. I'm growing, learning, meeting other people as well. So I'm excited about doing a podcast. And now we'll allow our distinguished guest to introduce herself.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Alisa. I'm from Florida currently, originally from Russia. I work as a licensed psychotherapist. I specialize in trauma and bring in a lot of different modalities to working with people with trauma. And that's something that I'm very passionate about. So this is definitely my life's purpose and mission, and I'm thrilled to be here today. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And Kevin, Odom, we'll let you introduce yourself as well.
You had to use my government name, man. I'm picking. Yes. So, good evening, folks. My name is Kevin. I am a licensed clinical addiction specialist, a licensed clinical mental health counselor, and a certified clinical supervisor, all in the state of North Carolina. And I'm looking forward to having Miss Alisa on the show tonight. And I'd like to say this. We are expanding our base as far as which platforms we are on. So this is just a memorized to the best of my ability list. All right. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, X, Odyssey, Focus Minds, Audius, Orb, Apex, and Essency. And we just did the last 4 or 5, most recently within the last 2 weeks. So that's a little bit about how far we are reaching out. We are reaching out into the decentralization world, Web3. And this is because of our main, one of our big sponsors, WebHash. They are a Web3 decentralization platform. Our main website is on Web3, is on the blockchain technology. So yeah, so we're trying to push it into that and push the boundaries of our podcast. But anyways, that's a little bit of about who I am and some of the new updates to our platform. Thank you.
When you talk about WebHash and all that technology, I'm like, I'm learning this whole process.
Yeah. Listen, that's a whole nother conversation. I'm waiting for WebHash to come on and actually let's do a whole podcast. It should be within the next 2 months. We're going to get him on.
Okay.
So, but Miss Elise, thank you again for coming on. And you are out of the state of Florida. So my first question, I think we always ask therapists this, right? Especially one therapist to another, right?
Mm-hmm.
What made you get into the mental health and substance use field? And I'd like to know that one just because I know that'll be like the kind of the driver into where this conversation is going to go tonight.
Yes, well, that's a long story, which I'm going to try to make short. In general, I feel like the longer kind of I walk this path, the more I realize through different signs that I receive, through different moments, the people that I meet, things I discover about myself, why I'm here. But I feel like it started back in Russia when I was a little girl, and I actually didn't know, and I only found that out until I was 34, my bad, that I was in this association since I was 2 years old. So from 2 years old out, I was disassociated and I had no idea how to cope with it. And so by the age of 18, because I was living in this state of hopelessness, I actually moved to the United States by myself. My family was, left back in Russia. I didn't have no money. I didn't have proper English. And that's how I got my journey started in the United States, and then getting a lot of traumatic experiences along the way and trying to heal them by myself too. It was a very lonely and isolated place, but also leading me to something greater. And so I feel like after I started addressing that, my own kind of struggles, and learning to cope with it in different ways, first, again, unhealthy coping skills, addiction related as well, right? And then I decided to go to a mental health field to get the answers I needed, because when I went to a therapist, I was like, that can't be it. The person did not understand me at all. And I was like, that can't be. Come on. Everybody would be like that, right? And I use the same stigma that usually a lot of people place on mental health field, that everybody is the same way. People don't know nothing. But it's probably because we go to one person and then we overgeneralize everybody else. And so for me, that first encounter was not good, but it also led me to go for, again, bachelor's degree in mental health and proceeding in that career as well, learning about myself, healing myself with many different tools that I've learned along the way, not just mental health tools, but also some alternative methods and healing modalities. And finding that this was my passion. This was something that I was so thrilled to get that liberation for myself. But it never stopped, because even last year I've got ahead again, right? There was that leap forward with EMDR that I discovered that was so profoundly impactful in my life. And now I'm using that a lot with people that I work with. So I feel like every step of the way, if we choose to listen to what we are receiving, to people that we meet, to the messages that we get from our own practices that we do, I feel like we realize more and more if we're aligned with what's meant for us, or maybe not so much. And so the story is long, but in short, I feel like learning to liberate myself from what I had to deal with allowed me to gain that passion and inspiration to be there for others, so that maybe they don't have to walk this path by themselves, and wanting to be there for them. And so that became that beacon of light for me, for myself, for my own healing, and also to be of service. So yes. What about you, Mr. Kevin?
Okay, Reubin. Great question. So, like yourself, right? Growing up in some rough experiences, right? Addiction completely shattered my family completely. And I'm not going to say anybody's names on here. I'm going to respect them because they've done some changing, quite a bit of changing, shall I say. But I saw it devastate and destroy family, my family, and there's so much stigma around substance use, trauma, suicide, mental health in general, and so for me, it goes back to I want to be a part of the solution and not the problem, right? And that's one of the main driving things that got me into the field. Didn't realize that I would enjoy the field as much as I do. But yeah, I mean, it's I have learned when I first started, I was this huge brain disease guy, right? And the more and the longer I practice, the more I realize that for me, I don't think I really fall under that area anymore. I've expanded out into other areas that has been when I use the brain disease model of addiction versus existentialism and other types of finding hope and meaning, right? I find that existentialism, finding hope and meaning, right, goes back to why they started, right? What makes them use versus the brain disease. And you know how many times I've tried to use the brain disease and people was just, well, I don't really care about how the brain works. Oh, okay. Okay, cool, great. Apologies, my bad, and then there's the other half of it would, the other half of the population would say, well, oh yeah, you're talking about the endorphins, you're talking about this, you're talking about that, you're talking about how drugs do this, you're talking about how drugs raise the blood pressure, you're talking about the drug on how we can get HIV, this, that, and the third, right? Teach me something that I don't know. And then I ran into a clinical supervisor who challenged me. He said, Kev, it's not a brain disease. He said, go home and study existentialism and restudy the brain disease, and then go back and look at every drug and see which part of the body it plays in, right? What the neurochemicals were. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And he really made me mad. But I went home and I was taking a neurobiology course in my doctoral program. And when I read that was the whole first or second chapter. And I'm like, you've got to be lying to me. So I texted him. I'm like, dude, you are so insane smart. Tell me, teach me. I'm open. Teach me. So that's where I started exploring more into existentialism and that branch of philosophy versus the brain disease that I have found to help nobody. So that's that's where my current clinical practice is. It's actually very interesting. So, yep.
Yeah, for sure. Especially I feel like I really love combining existentialism, especially logotherapy. Viktor Frankl's work just rocked my world in general, and understanding how humans can go through something like this and then bring this powerful gift to the world with this, tool of logotherapy and finding meaning. I feel like with trauma the same way, but again, trauma addiction goes hand in hand. There's no way you're going to have addiction without having trauma. And so I feel like understanding fundamentally what trauma is also can lead us to better address addiction issues. And spirituality is something that I heavily rely upon. Again, not the religion perspective, but I feel like understanding, again, seeing the problems that we have from a bigger stance, from a larger stance, from a more open perspective, because these minds are so heavily influenced and they're so restless that it's very hard to really make proper decisions to use them wisely, especially if we're talking about substance use as well. And I feel like if we suspend the mind and we learn to go within, because it's a great skill, but it's a skill nonetheless, just like we cannot get the results going to the gym once for a year, right? And then say, okay, now I have a killer body. It doesn't work. We all know that. But for some reason, when it comes to meditation, we're trying it once and we're like, well, it doesn't work for me. Of course it doesn't work. So is one workout is not going to work for you, but going and getting consistent with that will bring some changes, right? And so I feel like we have to dedicate time to that too, to learning about who we are, not who we are. I mean, as humans, yes. And I know we talk about the character flaws, right? Character defects and all this facets that are very important, agreed. But there's something so much more powerful and like placebo effect that's proving us how powerful that is. And we ignore it completely. It's like your belief can change your physiology, can change how you are, how you feel, all the sicknesses that you're dealing with. And I feel like we ignore that, but it takes courage, time, and effort to be able to dive so deeply into it and to understand who we are underneath this human body.
Yeah, and you mentioned something, and I think Reubin should pay attention to this.
What's that?
He's going to kill me after the day, okay? But you mentioned that it takes time. And then you mentioned one of his parts would be it takes time to go to the gym and get in a better shape, right? And so Reubin likes to work out, and he talks about how much he wants a six-pack and all that at 69 years old.
At 69, I just want to be healthy. My six-pack days are gone. I just want to be slimmer and healthy. Those six-pack days and all that's gone.
In the heart of the city, a vision was born, not just a piece of clothing, but a movement. Vital Apparel reflects not just the raw edge of the streets, but the spirit of innovation to bring about change in mental health worldwide. It's more than a style, it's a statement, a blend of comfort with an attitude made for those who refuse to be average. Embrace the culture, ignite your passion, and wear the revolution. Discover your new favorite piece today and be part of something larger than life. Visit our link now at vtlapparel.com to grab your next outfit. Use promo code ONEMOMENT to get 15% off your order. Why support us? The founders of Vital Apparel, Hung Dao and Alex Kozub, sought out to raise awareness, seeking to change the stigma around mental health. 5% of their profits are donated to Brain Research Foundation, furthering the research in mental health. Vital Apparel sponsors the One Moment podcast. We partnered with one another so that together we can make a global impact on mental health, substance use, and suicide, saving lives one moment at a time around the world. Help us break the stigma. Visit onemoment.chain.box to learn more about our podcast and to connect with us on social media. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels to stay up to date on our episodes. Subscribe now. Some photos in this ad were created by Grok.
You have killer physique. You're doing terrific. I can't believe you're 69. There's no way.
Yes, when you talk about, I think that's one of the reasons I got into this field. I didn't have the same experience as you know, coming from another country, but I moved from a small town in the South, and I grew up during the time, I would say, sort of like you heard of Jim Crow in that era? Are you familiar with that? Yeah.
Not sure.
Well, Jim Crow is like, I grew up in the South when it was very segregated and what have you. So my grandmother lived in New York, so I was always thought New York was this city of gold and all that. So I said, I'm going, like coming to America, I'm going to New York. So basically when I turned 18, I did move to New York with the intention of only staying there a year. And then my parents was set on me going back to school. So after I got there a year, I got a job and ended up working. So I put those plans off. But later on, I did go back to school. And I wanted to become a counselor because I've seen, like, when I lived with my grandmother, my step grandfather, he suffered from alcoholism and eventually he passed away. And I remember when I was in my teens, like calling the ambulance and rushing him to the hospital, and his veins would collapse and he almost passed away a few times. And over the time, I used to I would go with him to meetings, like 12-step meetings, just as an onlooker. And I think that probably was a factor in me getting into this field. And like you mentioned, the old, want to grow and expand. I know, like there's a physician, heal thyself. I think becoming a counselor, my wife would tell you, has made me an even better person. Because if I'm like giving advice, if I'm engaging a client, a patient, and trying to form that therapeutic alliance, I think I internalize some of those concepts and factors as well. So it has actually made me a better person as well. And that's what I'm about. I don't know how much time I have left on this earth, but I always tell people ask me at 69, well, you want to be young again? And I say no, because at 69, even though as Kevin say, the body's not the same and all like that, I have no six pack, but I'm more confident and secure and comfortable on my own skin at 69 than when I was in my 20s, where I probably looked better. My self-worth isn't based upon the way I look. It's based upon internalized, intrinsic values. So that's why I'm happy at 69 and, enjoying life. Sure.
So you mentioned, right, and there's a lot of stuff I want to hit on. So there's a couple of things that really stood out to me in your story as I've researched you and as I've read your little bio. And I think this is a huge piece that a lot of people don't understand, right? Especially including healthcare workers. But you mentioned trauma and being an immigrant to the United States. I used to work in immigration when we had a facility here in Greensboro, and the goal of the organization is when children show up, undocumented and alone, they will be sent to various facilities and then turned over to their sponsor, right? Sometimes their sponsor will be their family, mom, dad, uncle, aunt, grandparent, cousin, sister, right? But a lot of the general public in healthcare as a whole doesn't understand that type of trauma that occurs in immigration, right?
Yeah.
So what is a couple of things you would like to share, or some things you would like to share as far as that experience on what, maybe it was a cultural trauma shift, maybe it was the journey here. What would you like for people to understand as far as immigrating to a new country that you're not even a part of, that you have nothing about.
Right. Well, I think it starts, and in general, I feel like whether it's cultural, immigration related, or any other type of traumas, I feel like understanding how and what are the aspects of it and how it impacts our mental health, our physiology, our even spiritual crisis can occur from that. Because again, it's a very alienating kind of experience, because oftentimes, again, there are different ways in how trauma is manifested in life based on how we perceive the experience that happened that caused the trauma to be there, right? So if we look at trauma in general, so we have this simplistically put top brain and the bottom brain. Top brain is where we process information. Let's say we're watching a scary movie, always the easiest one because we've all done it, right? When we get scared, especially when we watch it late at night, we get scared, but also we have a lot of physiological response. It's not like I'm just having this visual or understanding mentally that, oh my God, that was scary. I feel fear. That's how we assess whether the movie was scary or not, if I was scared enough. And when we have these reactions, the sensations in the body, the neurons fire and wire together, linking and creating negative neural network under which we have negative belief about ourselves. And that belief, the top brain and the bottom brain, the top brain is not connected to the bottom brain. There's no connection and there's no logic in the bottom brain. So it's formed whether I can assess it. Oh, okay, that was just a movie. But in reality, my body experienced distress, whether I analyze it or admit to it or not, or if I even don't understand it sometimes, right? When we're moving to another country, and there is so many different components, not just my own experience of that, but also social level, right? How do I relate to other people? How am I treated? And so what kind of negative beliefs can be formed underneath that? Not only that I'm alone. I'm alone is one thing that a lot of people can kind of experience in one level or another. This one, we're talking to not being able to belong to the whole society as together, right? So there's no place where you can go and find refuge in reality, even though you can think that, yes, well, you found a little group. It's very different. And people, when they immigrate, and even from other countries, it's going to be a different society of your people in that country too. For instance, it's hard for me to, in general, people here that are Russian, it's hard, or Russian speaking per se, it's hard for me to relate to them because my path was very different, even though I relate much better to people from Russia that are just live there, right? So it's a little twist in that cultural understanding, or somehow I feel like I have more American mentality than Russian mentality, maybe because of the path I've had, maybe the people that I surround myself with. But I feel like everybody has, number one, very different experience of that. And sometimes you can get hurt pretty harshly in new place, especially when you don't have any support systems that you had where you came from. And so I feel like understanding that there's so many levels in which we have to really begin to learn how we've been affected and finding solutions for those, right? Finding people we can trust, finding resources that we can use to create a new life, because you're starting from scratch. You don't have any other way to connect to your roots, right? You're completely ripped out of that. And there was actually a funny thing when I was studying for my exam back in the day. And there was this, when you study personality disorders, and I was looking through the paranoid one, and I was like, oh my God, I hit every single box. I was like, oh, maybe I can explain what's going on. And then in the exceptions, they say it cannot be like, you can't assign that to people who are immigrants, because naturally they will all have that. So now imagine, or they may have that, right? Not all of them have that, but they may have that. And so now when we think about it, so even if this is something that may automatically come together with your transition to another country, that's a hardcore thing. So you don't trust people at all. You don't find solace anywhere. You can't even trust yourself sometimes because you don't even know where to turn. And especially when we're talking about children, that's when the world is just forming. So being in that environment where everything is a threat, and then what happens when we have this system in place, that negative neural network, then we begin to see everything through the lens of that perception. So let's say I say, I'm alone, I'm inadequate, I'm not safe, right? What else can there be? There can be so many different ways in how children interpret.
I am unworthy. I am not good enough. I don't add up. I mean, there's so
Absolutely.
many, those negative self messages. But go ahead.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. And then imagine all of this, and you're going into the world with that. So you're going and you have to be in school and you're seeing, I'm unworthy, I'm not good enough, I'm alone, I'm inadequate, I'm unlovable. how likely you are to go and meet those other kids or create those connections. How likely you are to participate in some artistic endeavor. You're like, well, there's no point for me for even trying this. I'm not going to do that. Right? So it affects every single thing. And the more, if we get experiences that reaffirm the same negative neural network, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And then we get to a point when people are so depressed, or kids, right? Or they're super anxious, or we label them with so many different things right now in mental health field. And then they have all of these labels, but the source of the problem, the root of the problem is never figured out. They just, we just give them medications, rather than trying to address that and look at the multifaceted kind of aspect, or trauma in general as a whole, and their process of adapting, their process to learning new social skills in a completely new environment. So anything they've ever learned through modeling, let's say, or through their families, it's gone. That's not going to happen here. So for them, they need to adjust and to completely new system in place. So it's a rough experience, but it's not, it can be the same rough for adults too who are transitioning. I feel like the younger one, especially if they're separated from family, that's the worst thing that can happen, because again, you don't have any type of support you can perceive as safety. Then you're thrown into the cage with a lion, right? You're going into the survival state and you're living in that until somebody who knows what they're dealing with comes and helps this child to navigate this very serious problem that they have. So yeah, immigration is whole beast.
It's a unique experience. Everybody has a unique experience. But when I hear you talking, it reminds me, I lived in New York and worked in a addiction a family that treated families. I met this young lady, and she's probably like 41 years old now. And I remember her telling me her experience. She came from El Salvador with her mother as a young woman, and she was saying that she didn't know the language. Uh, she had a difficult time maneuvering, and she was telling me when she went to school on the bus how she felt other people were talking about her, but she couldn't respond and she talked about the isolation and what have you. So when I hear you talk, I know uh, when you come from everybody, even other people from El Salvador, you mentioned Russia, everybody's experience can't be lumped together. It is unique with that person. Like you said, because another person migrates from Russia might not have the same experience or you might have as them. So I say we can't lump people together, and everything it is unique.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And one thing too, like you mentioned, the 41-year-old lady. And when we talk about that connections that have been built from the traumatic experiences, there's also this freeze physiology that happens. And that's why we use a lot of somatic work, understanding that physiology and trying to decode what happened in there, right, along with EMDR. But also understanding that when the trigger happens, it triggers that specific kind of memory, the physiological memory from that time. So sometimes, when people, and even in addiction, right, well, you guys probably observed a lot of that, even older folks that they've been triggered, they're throwing tantrums like they're 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds. Why? Because that's the part that's been triggered and it's showing up even in the adult body.
Sure. Definitely.
So now I know when Reubin starts acting out, I know what's going on.
Seriously, I remember, I always say once you leave home, you develop your own. Moving to New York, my eyes were open. I developed my own perceptions of people, interpretations, and all that. A lot of times our parents have a different perception of life and values and what have you. So you develop your own values, and sometimes you realize my values or my perceptions of people is different from my parents. So I remember when I would come home on vacation, my sister, I'm very outspoken. My sister would always tell me, Reubin, don't debate mom and dad. You're only here for a week, so just go along with it. But I remember that my wife, I would laugh at my wife, that old saying like, you're on your own, you're grown. But as you get into the driveway and you get closer and closer to that doorknob, you realize you're becoming that little boy. You're becoming that little boy again, and you don't want to do that. And you're trying to break that habit. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. So
For sure.
So even as an adult, sometimes you revert back to those childhood things and what have you. Sure.
Imagine a day where fatigue doesn't stand a chance, where clarity perks up your focus as the clock ticks on. Discover W Energy, the drink that transforms ordinary moments into opportunities. With no sugar and flavors that feel like gourmet art, each sip stirs your senses, readying you for greatness. W Energy is a focus energy drink that contains no sugar and is available in a variety of unique flavors. Their coffee fruit cherry extract is the star of the show. This ingredient is what makes W unique and helps to provide smooth and effective focus and energy, making it perfect for anyone who needs to conquer a task. W flavors are created with one goal in mind: to taste unlike any other beverage. We combine bold and unique flavor combinations to craft an experience for your tongue with each sip. W achieves its smooth, effective focus with a high-end tasting experience while using no sugar, no fillers, and no artificial color or dyes. Every product they create follows the same philosophy: be effective, be clean, and taste as good as nature will allow. Use promo code OneMoment to enjoy 10% off their products. And most importantly, they sponsor the One Moment podcast. They are helping to raise awareness of mental health, substance use, suicide, and much more around the world, seeking to make a global impact, reducing stigmas and changing lives one moment at a time. Visit onemoment.chain.box to learn more about our podcast. Follow us on our social media channels for more information and to stay up to date with our episodes.
No, you definitely, I see it all the time. Even especially or including the elderly population. Like, it doesn't matter age here, right? Because you're right. There's that learned mechanism, right? And it is about that healing. And you mentioned logotherapy, and you mentioned somatic therapy. So,
Yes.
so for the general public, right? What is logotherapy and what is somatic therapy?
So logotherapy comes from existential approach and its specific philosophy, the theory that was created by Viktor Frankl, who wrote the masterpiece, Man's Search for Meaning. He went through Holocaust. He describes this experience in his book as well. And after that, throughout this time, he was brewing this his baby, right? This book, this philosophy, which he couldn't even write on any paper. That was in his mind. However, he could, construct that. And it's about finding meaning even through the worst kind of times, through the worst experiences. And I feel like for trauma, it's an essential thing, because healing of trauma, sometimes when we kind of look at things that can happen to people, and everybody has different way of trauma and we have different definitions of trauma, but some things can be so brutal and so evil and so just disturbing that it's hard to make sense of that and to find kind of why it happened, especially if we look at it from a human perspective. But what Viktor Frankl is teaching us is to look for that meaning, because if we go with it and if we heal through it, we allow this to take place without having to resist that and try to find this bigger picture of why it may be happening. That's where, again, we begin to heal as well, much faster, at a faster rate. And like spirituality also works hand in hand with that, because I feel like human perspective is very limiting. And if we utilize a little bigger stance and saying, okay, and in my case too, I feel like when we get to a certain point, looking back and finding that in certain ways, I became different and I became a better version of myself because of that trauma. So I can't say a benefit, but I found something profound in there that helped me be where I am today. And I say, okay, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful I had it, even though it was awful and terrible, and I don't wish it upon anybody. But I'm here now in this new place with the new understanding, with new values, with new sense of self. Because of that, I would not be here if it wasn't for that trauma. And I feel like if we learn that, because again, even through the worst, again, losing a child, right? Going through, again, being kidnapped, trafficked. There's so many different things that we can't say, it's such a great experience. Of course not. This is awful. But at the same time, maybe this experience will help you advocate for those who will need that too, who is in those situations. And you will be the beacon of light once you learn your own lessons through that, and you begin to give it back to others. You begin to help others navigate that, maybe because that was your mission all along. But without this experience, you would not be able to do that. And I feel like trying to find the meaning of whatever happened for yourself is one of the best gifts you can give to yourself rather than trying to resist that or get stuck in that deep hole, which is sometimes a part of the healing process as well. To be in that place where there's no hope, it's really, there's no light, right? It's only darkness. And sometimes it's an important part of the healing process as well. So logotherapy, it's more like existential, trying to understand the meaning of experiences in life itself. And somatic work, very powerful. And now I feel like we begin to be more aware, just like with EMDR, right? We're breaking those neural connections that we spoke about because of how brain opens it up, and the brain is healing itself. But if we help navigate that with being more in our bodies, and what trauma does, we have this part of the brain that's called insula that completely changes how we experience ourselves. So we begin to experience disassociation from ourselves, from our lives. And it's hard to pinpoint if we're in it, because clearly we're dissociating. We can't even understand where we are. Technically, it's very out of our conscious awareness. But if we learn to go in, to be present with ourselves, we call it interoception. It's being aware of everything within your body, and to be able, and it's a skill too, to be able to go in and to work with what's showing up for you in your system as well, because we are one entire system. We have mental, emotional, physical, we have a lot of different parts to that being that we are. And I feel like when we go again to different places to treat one thing that's physical, or one thing that's mental, or church, we just take care of our spirit. It's all together. We have to understand we're one system. So everything interacts with one another. And if we learn also to understand the physiology, and by the way, one very interesting fact from, again, just trauma education in general, we cannot have PTSD in relaxed physiology. It's impossible. Just like we cannot have anxiety in relaxed physiology. So if we learn to always maintain our presence within the body and learn to relax into it, we can heal a lot of what happened to us and what conditioned us. However, when we get triggered, guess what? We're going off the rails right away. We're going to the sympathetic dominance, which is survival, which is a lion is sitting next to me right now. So try to relax when you have a lion sitting next to you. So that's why it takes work and it takes time to learn to navigate that and to be present with yourself, and to first do it in calm states, right? Going in and grounding and experiencing yourself, literally experiencing what's going on. If I think about that, notice the tension, learn how can you soften up, how can you learn to feel safe in any circumstance. That's a great, again, it's a skill. I feel like people expect quick results. That's why medical field is so in demand in a lot of ways. But is it really helping, or is it harming? Maybe it's helping in the beginning so that we can do the work and then have those skills, coping skills, because sometimes, yes, it's hard. We need medications in a lot of ways. We do, for a certain period of time, but that was never meant to be a long-term use, and unless it's something like a chronic illness or things of that nature. So I feel like also understanding that we can't rely always on this kind of quick fixes, and we have to do the work if we want to heal internally and completely, because medications are not going to heal the roots of it. We have to do it. And so somatic work can be very powerful and profound for people to find new perspective. The moment they relax into it, even for a few minutes, our neocortical function goes up, because we leave that survival state and we begin to receive new perspective. I'm not even saying anything. I have people who are like, oh, I don't know what to do. We do this quick exercise. They're like, you know what? I think I'm capable of. It's been 2 minutes and you're now capable, when before you were overwhelmed. You are magic. You are in yourself. You're magic. Just look what you can do if you attune to yourself, if you go in. And that's such a profound experience for anybody who can, in 2 minutes, understand they have a very different belief now about themselves and about their situation.
A clinical supervisor saying that, those messages that we hear from childhood onward into our adult years, they never vanish or go away. But what we can do is supplant them, or not replace them, but with positive messages, and balance those negative messages out. You get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's true even for myself a lot of times when you hear those negative messages. That's why I talked about, I hear a lot of older adults saying now, being more, comfortable in your skin, because hopefully as you get older, hopefully you get wiser and you learn. I think even if I had become a counselor, at some point learning, a lot of times I hear other people saying, they learn the concepts or the terminology for different approaches in therapy, but then they found out, well, I was using that already. Get what I'm saying? But they didn't understand what it was actually was, the terminology for it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, those skills we do, I feel like, and again, that comes to the point, we have to know ourselves, right? We need to know because we have the answers. We have them. It's just we don't listen to ourselves, maybe because of
Yes.
our beliefs that we don't know, or our beliefs that we're, again, unimportant or not enough or inadequate or whatever the case. And I feel like if we spend more time with ourselves, truly sitting with that, but again, you have to meet the best parts of yourself and your demons too, your shadow, right? And you have to meet it, you have to embrace it, you have to love it, to understand it. And then you're able to work with it together, because that shadow, while we're in this body, it's always going to be there. It doesn't
Yes.
matter where you stand, you will see your
Right.
shadow.
Right.
That shadow is
Accepting that
always
it's
with
going to be
us.
there. That's what it's important to know that. Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And just if we domesticate it with our ego, right? Our ego is a wild horse. If we don't domesticate it, it does whatever it wants. It's going to be jumping. It cannot work for you unless you learn to domesticate that. And it's our ego, our mind, right? We have to learn how to navigate it. Then we use it as a tool and not being used by it, like Eckhart Tolle says in his book. So I feel like it's a powerful skill to, again, recognize the things that we have, the challenges and the strengths that we have, and to learn to love them and to use them to our benefit, and to always keep an eye on that too. Because once we say, oh, I'm healed, then it begins to affect you without you knowing. Right? Like with relapse happens way before the actual act as we know it. Yeah.
I am also of the belief that there are times in our lives that we are, when you talk about trauma, when you talk about fear, and our body feels it. We're afraid to take that next step. We're afraid to step into the unknown because we get comfortable with what we know, right? It's like trying to get, people trying to get sober. There's a struggle because on the one hand, it's something new and they're afraid, and yet on the other hand, they have to give it up. And Lorraine spoke about that a lot, right, during clinical supervision, and I've seen that firsthand with people that I work with. And then that also brings me back to why you mentioned something, and I don't want to forget it because I know I will. Got that good forgetter upstairs, right? Dr. Siegel wrote a book. And I forget the name of the book, but it's one of the best books I ever written. And it sounds like you might have read it. Okay, it sounds like it because when you spoke of somatic therapy, and what it is, Dr. Siegel wrote a book, and he's a psychiatrist or a psychologist out of the state of California, but he talks about body scanning, and that's his primary practice, right? And he uses body scanning for addiction therapy, for trauma therapy, for similar stuff to what you were just sharing about, right? And he said that he found that when he's got different examples of real life cases laid out, and it shows that when people would focus on their feet, right, they would come up and focus on each part of their body. When they hit their knee, they might come out of that trance state, and come to find out they just remembered that they broke their knee 20 years ago and didn't even think about that's why they were doing this, or that's why they were experiencing this, right? And they never once thought about it. And then sometime there was this one situation that the lady was trying to go through it, and it took her about 5 sessions before she light bulb came on. She'd always get up to her chest and she'd go into a panic attack. 5 sessions later, roughly give or take, she's in there. She works through it, and she found out that the reason she was having a panic attack is because, if I remember correctly, her dad had raped her when she was, a young child. And then through that body scanning, she was able to find healing and growth in that. So a lot of what you were sharing reminded me of Dr. Siegel's work, which has been profound. I don't teach it, but I do encourage people to buy his literature and actually go look at his research.
Does anyone else have that one moment where everything feels too overwhelming to handle? Fortunately, there are therapeutic resources where you will learn the skills necessary to bring clarity and focus amidst chaos, making everything feel manageable again. At Mindfully Me Counselling, we guide you towards clarity and calm with personalised therapy. Embrace your self-care today. Visit mindfullymecounselingplc.com to learn more. We sponsor the One Moment podcast. They meet weekly to discuss critical topics related to mental health, raising awareness on various topics such as substance use, suicide, trauma, family, and more. Visit onemoment.chain.box to learn more about the podcast and to be connected to additional resources. Subscribe to their social media channels for more information.
Yeah. Well, trauma resides in physiology. So again, it's very hard. I feel like when before we used to do more like flooding, right? When we used to work with as a field, right? With the veterans, and what the talk therapy was the primary kind of go-to. And so when people just talk and talk and talk about it, sometimes they were getting worse rather than better. And so now, thankfully, we're able to address that. We're very fortunate to be in this field right now because this is something that this new information with EMDR and somatic work, we begin to understand more of why sometimes it's very hard, even if we use just talk therapy, it's very hard to change how we respond to the trigger. How do we feel through those, experiences that can be stressful and challenging? And when you've mentioned about that fear of the unknown, it's motivational interviewing, right? As we know it is the beginning point. It's understanding what are we going to gain. I always give this 3 steps. It's before even any work, right? I feel like there are these 3 steps. First, it's self-awareness. First, we need to understand, okay, I have a problem, right? Do I have a problem? What's going on there? When I begin to be more aware, right? We can't do better if we don't know better. So we need to know better first. And when we gain that self-awareness, we begin to say, okay, something is really wrong. And I feel like a lot of times when somebody is trying to, a lot of times people don't want to change. We all know that, right? But it's not my job to try to force you to change. So if you feel like your life is working out, great, continue. I'll support you where you are. Well, why are you here then if everything is working out? Right? So we have to gain that self-awareness to see where we stand, how well we understand that there's a problem. Second one is willingness to change. I say, you know what? I'm sick and tired. I don't want to live like this anymore. I want to do something different. I do want to, and I'm intending to do that. That's number 2. And the third one is being ready to change. And that's where the fight begins. That's just the beginning. But before that, there is maybe even more steps than this, but it still takes a long time to come to the point where say, you know what, I'm willing to tolerate the discomfort. I'm willing to go for that forward. I know it's going to be hard, and I will put my best into this fight because I can't go back anymore. There's no way. And unfortunately, I had a client that I lost when I was working in rehab as well. And he was telling me, brilliant boy, he was incredible, from a good family, and stating that he's like, I know. And he said that twice to me in one-on-one. He said that I know if next time I'm going to go out, I'm going to be dead. He said that twice. He went out and he was dead. And that was devastating. I've lost a lot of people. And so I feel like, number one, we have better self-awareness than what we think. We're just trying to convince ourselves otherwise. And I feel like we have to pick which voice we're listening to in our head, because we do know better. It's just sometimes we don't want to do better. And sometimes life is pushing us really hard in order for us to finally take that step forward. And with that knowing better, there is responsibility. It's a gift too. To know better about ourselves, it's a true gift, and we cannot underestimate it, because there's that calling, there is that pull. Whether we believe in spirituality or not, regardless, life is pulling you forward to make that step to change yourself. If you don't listen, we're all responsible for our consequences. Just like in therapy, I don't get credit. I don't give myself credit for any failure or any success of people, because I'm there providing equally to everybody. But what they do with what they receive, that's not my responsibility. I'm not going to be taking responsibility for that, because I know what I'm responsible for already. I'm following the steps. But everybody, that's the free will, right? Everybody has free will to decide what do they want. And it's very sad to see when people don't choose better for themselves. And it's sad, and I feel really emotionally affected by it. But there is nothing I could have done, even if I wanted to. And just like we know with people working with suicide, how relatives sometimes of those who take their own lives, they blame themselves. They're like, I could have done better. No, you really did. You couldn't. You really couldn't. And sometimes people blame themselves. So I feel like we need to learn to take responsibility for our life if we want to change. But it's a deeply personal decision. What am I doing with the new knowledge, with the new experience? So yeah, it's scary, but again, what is unknown? I mean, we may not be struggling with something currently, but how do I know that tomorrow I'm driving and I'm not going to get killed? We don't know that. How can we know, right? So the unknown, rather the sense of safety and the control we think we have as humans, is literally not that great. It's not that big as we think. So realizing that the unknown can be the opposite, can be unlimited possibilities, because you already tried where you are. So why you want to remain there? You know where that's going to end. Why not try something new and see maybe it's going to be better? There's no guarantees, but you can assure yourself at least you're not going to repeat the same thing. We can't solve a problem with the same mind that created it, Albert Einstein. We need to get a new mind. We need to start thinking differently, and doing the same thing, expecting different results, the same thing. It's insanity. So if people find themselves in a state where they need to make that decision, well, they know what they have to do. They have the answer. It's not a secret. It's not something that they have to receive from you. They know. And so if they don't think they know, they're lying to themselves. And that's why they need to really tune into what they are and what they need and what the next step they have to take.
It's amazing because I think we talk about trauma and so many facets to that. And I think trauma can be passed on through generations as well. I see that sometimes. I remember working with a client once, and I'm not an expert in domestic violence or anything, but I listened, and and at first they were concerned about having her with the male, like and talking about domestic violence. But one of the things that she saw that there was a male that's willing to listen and being empathetic, and she talked about how her throughout her generations, the women, her grandmother was abused, went through domestic violence. Her mother did, and then she did as well. And talk about the attitudes that prevail. Like when she went to her mother for help, it was like, "Oh, just suck it up." He's taking care of the house. He's doing that. So just stay there. And could you imagine you going to somebody for help and they're telling you that? You might just suck it up. He's paying. Just stay there. And so just to hear her talk, it made me have more insight. And what have you. Just realizing that trauma, not just domestic violence, but other areas can be passed down through generations, through the attitudes, through the body, and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's actually a book, The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, that talks exactly about that, and how certain traits of character are linked to certain diseases, how trauma is formed even before the person is born. There's so many things, there's so many aspects to that. And generational trauma is a very, very big thing, and it's a real thing. And we all, unfortunately, are we all have that. We all have that. And I feel like understanding that too, that we have to do more work based on the knowledge we have right now. We're more responsible for healing all those wounds. In a way, I mean, it sounds a little too much for some people, because again, some folks went through severe experiences that we have to deal with now as a consequence. But at the same time, it's also very liberating that we have a choice. Do I want to act from those old kind of patterns, even transgenerational patterns, or I will choose to break the curse, the spell of the past, and I will choose different path?
I'm glad that y'all mentioned generational trauma, because a lot of that, I think when I think of generational trauma, and of course we can talk about EMDR, somatic therapy, logotherapy. I also think about, similar. I have similar ideas to the brain disease of addiction, and to what I learned at. I went to a conference up in Philly. Right? I don't know if you were there, Miss Alisa, but if you haven't, definitely check it out. It's going to be in Denver, Colorado next year. Um, one of the things that I heard while there, and I feel like this is something I've been screaming since 2019. We've worked ourselves into a system of compliance. It's time to get back to a system of people, right? And so when I think about, like, for an example, the brain disease, EMDR, somatic therapy, logotherapy. Well, when we look at the field as a whole, right? We've worked ourselves into a huge problem and this huge burden that you got 90% of addiction therapists practicing the brain disease of addiction. Well, if that's been so successful, why has the problem gotten worse, right? And then you also practice in or focus on the idea that, we focused on this talk therapy for trauma and other types of, problems. Hasn't really helped much, right? And so when are we going to get back to a system of people, as you and Reubin said, several times throughout the show so far, everybody's different, right? So EMDR might not work for somebody, right? Whereas somatic therapy might work for that person, whereas the brain disease might help somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a, let's start utilizing all of our resources versus, oh my God, addiction falls under the brain disease, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's look at how often that we're separating people rather than trying to bring people together, right? And so when I
Mm-hmm.
think about generational trauma, I didn't hear about this in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17 when I was going through my undergrad, right? I learned about this in 2018, and rarely did we have any talks about it. And now all of a sudden, there's this huge push in generational trauma. And so I'm actually glad that you mentioned that. There's generational trauma is something that we're trying to backpedal on and trying to fix. And it's not an overnight matter.
No, not at all. I feel like it's, again, it's funny because I feel like we always expect something very unrealistic out of the healing process. And I think maybe generational trauma and addressing that is not any of the first kind of steps to healing, but it's definitely something that if we want to continue healing, because I don't think there is the end of, well, there's the end of treatment, but there's not the end of healing. And there's always something, even if we've worked on the past, then there are new kind of events that begin to reshape and rock our world as we go forward. So I feel like understanding that, again, that's where we have to practice the routine. We have to really know and sit with ourselves. We have to utilize and always learn new skills and new ways of, whether for ourselves, how to heal ourselves, whether how to address other people if we're talking about providers. So yes, for sure, one approach is not going to fit all, but I feel like it's important to have a lot of tools in your toolbox in order to navigate what this person may need from the time, whoever's in front of you. And sometimes, yes, you need to really address the whole system of their family and maybe even their past, and seeing where those certain beliefs, or they can be, again, the physiology keeps a lot of it, unfortunately. And again, EMDR is a very, very, very useful thing for most folks struggling with trauma, just because, again, the trauma resides in those neural connections. But again, what do you do after, okay, you get that freedom? We have to still address how we think, because we can think ourselves to analysis paralysis, right? We can think ourselves to death too, right? Then again, support system. How good of people do we have? Because we can, even if I'm doing trauma work, but the person remains in that abusive relationship, like Reubin said about the domestic violence, what good is going to do? Like, it's going to be new traumas accumulating and going forward anyway. And some people get really stuck. So I feel like there's so many parts that we have to acknowledge of ourselves, and not just our parts, the parts of our ancestors, and to pay attention to that and see, can there be anything in the back there that could have been affecting me now, even though I may not even, I've never met those people, right? Because again, history, it's brutal. We look at different populations, Native Americans, African Americans, right? Asian Americans who are coming here too. There's so much brutality that happened just in this country alone, even though it's so young, right? So we have to really think about that context as well, and cultural context that plays a part. But again, depending on, I feel like maybe generational trauma is something that's down the line, when you learn how to navigate yourself so you can self-regulate, where you are, you can get out of very uncomfortable kind of emotional bursts that can happen, because it will happen with trauma. It will happen regardless. And so I feel like learning that first before we're going anywhere even deeper into that topic, it's important.
Well, no, I think you're right, and both of you said it earlier too, and I think a big part of and I'm not an expert on generational trauma, but I do think it's a huge part of why it's continuing to be a problem, not just in my generation, right, but the next. I think there's what two generations ahead of me now, right, or whatever. Before, I don't know. That's been born since 1990. So, but one of the things is social learning, right? Uh, and for me, my direct experience with the social learning deal, right, as far as like this generational stuff, right, generational trauma and everything else is, you know, my experience was almost similar to yours, Reubin, where you said that at age 18 you went to New York, you was planning on staying there for a year, ended up being there for 38. You're still a New Yorker, just so you know. You'll never be a Southerner. You'll never be a North Carolinian. You'll always be a New Yorker. Okay, but you learned, right, and as you said too, ma'am, is when you came to the States, you learned your own identity. You grew into it. You evolved into it, right?
Yeah.
Well, same thing with me when I had a life-changing experience at the age of 22. For 22 years, I lived life based on family beliefs, this belief, that belief, because this person said I needed to do this person said I needed to do that, this person said this, and it's just like all this garbled up mess, right? These negative, right, and I shouldn't say negative, but all these messages and this information that I was taught, that I learned. Well, at age 22, had a life-changing experience, and I have my own beliefs, right? I have my own ideologies. I have my own thought processes. I have my own idea of who I am. And I feel more free, right?
Mm.
I feel 10 times more self-confident. I feel like I have my own voice. And I can add to the list infinitum, right? But that's been my experience, 100%. And, I've had quite a few family members uh, interestingly say that that say negative things about me, you know because of some of those changes, and it's like, here's what it is, like, you know I have my own life to live, right? I can't live, we can't live life based on, unless you're a collectivistic society, of course. That's completely different. So for individualistic society, let me just
Mm.
be more, or let me preface that, right, and what I'm about to say. But you can't live life based on other people's ideologies, other people's ideas, beliefs, values. You have to have your own core values, your own self identity that is tied into, who you are and what you've been through, what your experiences have been,
Mhm.
right? At least that's, so when I think about generational trauma, I think about all of that stuff, right? As Reubin, you grew up during Jim Crow. That's huge
Yeah.
generational trauma, right? You migrated from Russia, right here, and you had your own trauma, right?
Mm.
That's also a form in the system of generational trauma. And so, how do you overcome the racism? How do you overcome that? The immigration. You have to grow. You have to evolve into who you are.
Feeling lost or alone, struggling with unbearable trauma or addiction. Every day feels heavier than the day before. The weight of unaddressed emotions and problems can leave you paralyzed. On the One Moment podcast, we are aligned with the vision and mission of the Place to Heal. Founded in Sanford, North Carolina, the Place to Heal is a growing multi-specialty mental health and substance use practice dedicated to facilitating healing and personal development. Our team of compassionate clinicians are committed to providing evidence-based therapeutic interventions tailored to each individual's unique journey. We are passionate about empowering our clients to overcome challenges and achieve emotional wellness. The Place to Heal hosts and sponsors the One Moment podcast. Visit onemoment.chain.box to learn more about our podcast and to be connected to the Place to Heal. Follow us on social media for more content.
I think sometimes you overcome those. People say it might be considered dysfunctional skills, but I know for me, I um, I've been working here where I've been now 13 years, And they often say, I'm assertive, but I'm very outspoken. And I say even maybe a little bit arrogant. And I know that. And my wife says that. I know that because I know that growing up I remember I was one of the first, uh, my sister went to an all black school, and I decided I want to go to a predominantly white school before they actually had integration. The following year they actually closed and they had integration. But I remember going to an all white school and being teased. But that arrogance that I developed was a shield. It helped me to feel like they can't break me down. You know what I mean? So I think sometimes that arrogance, it served me in the sense that, even to the day, I'm not saying arrogance is a good thing, but sometimes it can be a shield and it can protect you. But I know you can't, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. What if
Yeah.
it was your spirit that was protecting you? Maybe it's not arrogance, it's that confidence that you deserve to have navigating
Right.
such
Yes. Well,
experiences.
maybe that's right. Sure. Yeah.
Because sometimes people may make, and that's what Kevin also said, right? About some people may not be happy about how you're behaving because you're not kind of fitting their expectations of what you should be doing. And
Sure.
there's a lot of those people. So we have to also kind of think about, a lot of people won't agree with you, and they have the right to think what's best for you too. They have that right. It's a free, they're free to think whatever they want, but it doesn't make it true for you. It doesn't have
Right.
to,
Sure.
unless we allow it. So I feel like also like working on that and finding your own voice, that's exactly the point. You have to silence all of this noise that we hear
Mm-hmm.
every single day. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I feel like sometimes it's important to ask for suggestions because sometimes we just don't have the right tools yet.
Mm-hmm.
We also have to trust ourselves. Who am I willing to trust, right? Then
Yes.
okay, you know what? I don't think that person will do good for me. But then we go there anyway. How many times you guys, if you ever trusted someone and then you found out that the first impulse you had, I was like, I'm not sure about that person. And then you're like, you know what? It's probably, I overthink that. You go forward and then you learn why you shouldn't have trusted that person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We all had
That's
that
very
experience,
true.
right? And so it's learning to trust yourself first. We have to become our best friend. This is the only relationship that will be there for us until the last breath.
Right.
And we always count on someone else before we count on ourselves. Every single relationship with others that we have will end in pain. Even the most beautiful one, either we're going to die, others going to die, we're going to go separate ways. This is your best friend. You are your
Yes.
best friend.
That's
There's
true.
no other way. If we don't
Yes.
trust ourselves and we trust someone else instead, you're going to ruin yourself because
Yes.
you're not following your calling and your voice.
Yes.
But it's a process of learning because oftentimes we lose that connection with ourselves and we never trusted, maybe we never had it. And that's how codependency comes upon, substance use comes upon, because we never learned the proper way of connecting to ourselves and trusting ourselves that, you know what? And in general, if I don't have self-love, then I'm more prone to self-harm, because addiction is self-harm too. But if you truly love yourself, you will never put yourself in an abusive relationship because you're like, what? What did you say to me? Exit is right there. Get out. You just call it as it is. But it takes courage to know that you deserve better. And a lot of people don't think that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like it's a very powerful journey to learn about that, but it's a very hard one too.
It is.
So it's going to be a challenge, and we have to be ready for that. And that's that third step that I was talking about. It's like, say, okay, I know it's going to be a shit show, but I have, like, there's no other way. I can't go back. So the only way for me is forward now. Like, I've exhausted my resources in the past. So now I have to learn to hear what I have, who I am, what I'm going to do, even if others don't agree with me, even if it's going to cause a rupture in my relationship, even with my family. I have to follow what's important. There's no other way. Right? But again, it takes a lot, and it's not easy. And sometimes we have to take years in order to prepare to take that step from that edge and to try to fly. But guess what? In a lot of ways, if we do decide that, we learn that it was not as hard as we thought initially. And we actually can fly rather than fall, because that's what our restless mind, because we're afraid of the unknown, as we spoke about that. It creates all of this defense. It's like, you know what? It's not safe. Just like when we lived, let's go back to the cave people, right? When we lived in the caves, if you separate from your tribe, you're a dead man or a woman. There's not you're dead. The only way you can survive, even to like 20 years old, is going to be within this certain group of people, because you're by yourself. You can't do that. So this survival has been with us for so long. And I feel like we forget that it's still functioning, it's still going. And so, yes, we're going to be afraid of anything that's new, but it doesn't have to be that we're going to die in there. It's just our amygdala becomes hyperactive, and it's presenting to us with this imaginary threats that may not even be there. But it's what if we have the story starting with what if, it's always amygdala speaking. It's just the anxiety that's going to try to keep you safe, but it's overworking us, not letting you to make the right choice and to take the right step.
At the beginning of the show, I know we have to close it up at some point, but at the beginning of the show, you mentioned about electricity and not being able to see it, but and liking with spirituality. And have you ever read the book The Secret?
Of course, yeah.
And I remember reading that book and seeing the video they have it, and when it came out, it was very popular. A lot of those concepts, but it talked about we about that force, that energy that we can't see, but we can experience, and that's what I like in spirituality too. But one of the concepts that always had me puzzled, uh, the secret, I can't explain it, but they more or less said that whatever happens in your life, I'm not saying it's your fault, but you attract it to you because you're on the same wavelength as that experience. Like the guy was saying in the video, one of the people that was author one of the chapters said that even those people who were in that building on 9/11, he was saying, not saying it's their fault, but they were meant to be there. They were, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow, but I see that with some of my patients that talk about things that happen in life and then I had a patient talk about his first wife dying of cancer, then his second wife dying of cancer, and and it was just, I hear people talk about that, and I think, I don't know if saying it's their fault, but I think there's some truth to it. Your attitudes and your behaviors and your concepts might have some form of attracting other liking concepts or behaviors in your life. It's making, am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I would even take it a little deeper. Not only that, I do feel like certain experiences, it's my personal opinion based on the readings and the soul searching I've done for many years trying to discover that certain things have to happen. And if we'll look back and see on the worst of the worst experiences and we question like if they were really meant to happen or not, well, guess what? They already happened. So yes, that's the proof that they had to happen because they did. So what do you do about that now? That's where we can take that, control, because the only thing we can control in our life is our thoughts and how we perceive a situation. Right. But then also paying attention to, I feel like we're meant to, change and evolve. We're meant to do that. And so how are we going to change? We can predict that. We can take charge of that. It's based on every single step. What am I doing right now? Right. When people are, it's like, okay, I can be studying or I can be on the reels on my phone. That's a choice. You have a free choice. But then certain experiences will happen. If you're not prepared for that, if you're not putting in the work, you can miss an opportunity right now that's meant for you. And then it's going to take you longer to get to that point. Just like with addiction, right? When sometimes it's multiple attempts. Maybe sometimes that's how it's meant to be for us to learn. I feel like there is part of free will, but there are certain things that sacred contracts that will happen regardless. We're prepared or not, and we're just here to learn. It doesn't happen to us; it happens for us. And what we gain out of it, that's the freedom that we get. It's like, how do I take this experience? How do I view it? Because it happened already. There's nothing I can do. I cannot go back and change it. This is what I have to work with. So what do I do about it now? And that's that liberation and freedom we'll seek. But we see it as a trap because our perception is, I'm a victim of this. And yes, in the original sense, you may be a victim based on the definition of it. But is that how you want to view yourself? Because you don't have to.
Right.
Even if somebody else views you in that way, you don't have to. You have a choice. Is it hard? Yeah. It may take some time. Yeah, I've been in victim mode after my own stuff for a while. And I took it and I talked about my trauma all the time. And I was like, because we talk about what hurts. But then how long? Then I got tired of it. I'm like, okay, something's got to change. It's been too long I've been in that. And it took me years. It took me about 3 years to start the process of change. That's like, I'm like, okay, I'm sick and tired. I was ready. I was at a point, I'm like, I'm not going back. No, I'm going forward. So what am I doing now? And then you start scheduling things and placing those things in your life to help you grow. Is it hard? Yeah, you're breaking your own patterns. You're breaking yourself in half and 4 parts and whatever, shattering yourself sometimes so that you can rebuild back together. We cannot put a new building somewhere where there's an old building. You have to destroy it to be able to rebuild it.
Sure.
And it's maybe holding sentimental value inside. It's beautiful. They were a great family time. But the new one will be so much stronger, more beautiful, more powerful. And you can still hold the sentiment within yourself. But this place is going to be so much better. But it's uncomfortable, even though you know that this is not serving you anymore. And it's okay to grieve that part of you. But when we go through this trauma, through these experiences, a part of you will die. And that's good because you free up the space of that. And you grieve yourself, you grieve that experience, and then you put something new into it to reinvent yourself, to make you so much better. And that's such a profound and powerful experience. But we have to allow it. Because oftentimes we cling to the past, but guess what? You're changing regardless. Even if you think you're not changing your patterns, you're still changing. It's just you're not choosing to grow in a certain way. You're kind of following this path of wherever you are right now. And again, I don't think there is a right way to do it, but I feel like you just have to know yourself when you're ready to take that step and to put that hard work. But it's not going to be as hard as you think, because we're very fortunate, humans in general, to have incredible ability for adaptability. We adapt to everything. We forget that. We only need a little bit of time to do something, and then that becomes your second nature. But you have to give yourself that chance.
Well, you mentioned something, and I've always taught from the ideology of Charles Darwin was right. Whether people want to believe in the theory of evolution or not, right? Think about it though. He said survival of the fittest, right? Well, no, I mean seriously.
We evolve, sure.
Right? No, yeah. So you can say, people can disagree with them all day and say, oh yeah, well, the evolutionary theory, we didn't come from apes or whatever. Look, I'm not here to debate whether we came from apes, gorillas, or what have you. Don't care. None of my business. Okay, I'm not that type of a scientist. But what I will debate though is when he said that the survival of the fittest, right? That the strongest survive. And so if you look at that part of the evolutionary theory, right, the more philosophical perspective, right, he talks about the need to change, the need to adapt, the need to grow, right? He talks about that. And I think that's important because you just said that. We're going to change whether we want to or not. The problem is, are we adapting and moving on with the times, or are we going the opposite direction? And so I definitely have to agree with it. That's been my direct experience. If you can, two things, okay, to wrap it up, right? One thing that you would love for the audience to take away when they watch this episode, and number two, what is your call to action?
Okay. So number one, don't fear, because again, there's nothing that you already know what's out there anyway, wherever you are. So if you need to have this, you have to take the step forward, just do it, because you already know where you are. Something new may actually rock your world in a very beautiful way. And call to action, just learn about yourself. I feel like that's always my call to action, is to befriend yourself, to become, to know how certain things affect you. What do you like? What do you need? What are your needs are? You can fulfill them so that you don't have to get stuck with other people who may fulfill that need. And, we literally get stuck in the very unhealthy relationships. I feel like just learn about yourself and learn to love who you are, because every single human is so wonderful and beautiful. And if we don't acknowledge that yet, then we don't acknowledge the divine plan. I mean, if we look outside and see all the nature, it's perfection. It's perfect, even though we may perceive it as not, but it is perfect in many different ways. And so are you. So just learning about yourself and acknowledge yourself as the sacred being that you are.
That's a great call to action. I like hearing that.
I absolutely love it too, myself.
Does anyone else have that one tool that makes building a website a breeze? In an era driven by digital change, WebHash is the indispensable tool that holds the key to effortless website creation.
Create websites that endure, defy censorship, and bypass any single point of failure. As cutting-edge technology redefines reality, seize the power to build beyond limits. Join the Web3 revolution now and forge paths others can only dream of. Visit our site today and build your legacy. Building my own space on the web was always a grind until I hit up WebHash. Their no-code builder is my ace. It's swift and solid. It's like rocking a digital fortress that's immune to the typical shutdowns. Level up your web presence without stress. Ready to stake your claim in the digital realm? Dive into WebHash today, connect your Web3 wallet, and get started. They have multiple subscription plans, from a free version to a lifetime subscription. Check them out today at webhash.com. Most importantly, they sponsor the One Moment podcast, helping to raise awareness to critical topics in the healthcare field. Our official website was built using the WebHash platform. Throughout the projects that the One Moment movement built on WebHash, they stood behind and supported it all the way. Sign up and start building your website today. Don't forget to visit onemoment.chain.box and subscribe to our social media channels.